Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is a video where we are going to be covering all of the changes in Games Workshop's latest Battle Scroll. Battle Scroll is the balance update that they do every 3 months. Now, I'm recording this intro after I've actually done 4 hours of recording. So I'm going to give you a quick TLDR of what's in it, because I do know that this video runs really long. That's because we look at every single rules change and we look at all the points changes, and I give you like a mini overview of every single faction. So that's quite a lot of information to put, and you can't do that in 10 minutes. So I'm going to try and give you a quick overview now. Number one, and maybe the most important thing, there's a big change to the seasonal rules, so the GHB seasonal rules. They have amended specifically the bodyguard rule that reduces attack, so you can no longer do that on the charge. And they've added 2 new special honor guard abilities, where one of them allows infantry units wholly within 12 of an infantry hero that is not a leader of a regiment. So you know those little support ones. So that guy is going to be able to give +2 inches movement to infantry units that don't fly that are wholly within 12 inches. So that's one of the things you can take instead as an honor guard ability. The other one allows you to pick a non-unique monster that gets +1 to hit and never suffers any battle damage to it, which is quite fun. So if you took Gargants as an example, King Brod wouldn't be able to take that, but you would be able to give that to like a Beast Smasher. +1 to hit, never suffers battle damage, pretty good. So those are the changes. They also changed up that if you are more drops than your opponent, then you can choose 2 of the seasonal special rules. So you can choose to have the monster thing I just talked about and the movement thing potentially in your army if you're more drops than your opponent. And when you choose those, don't forget you choose those at the start of each game. So that's a big change, and that's hopefully dealing with how many drops you are. So that's that. There's been a bunch of. They also added an elastic mechanic in to do with the underdog. They've added a new mechanic in they've changed it around a little bit. So they've changed how you become the underdog, and they've also changed it into this new thing called the up dog. Just waiting for someone to say, "What's up, dog?" The up dog thing isn't real. They haven't done that. That's just a hilarious thing to say. Anyway, what they've done is if you're ever behind by 6 points, then immediately you become the underdog for the rest of the battle, which gain you an extra command point in your opponent. And you also can do battle tactics on a double turn, which previously you couldn't. Also, if you ever do a double turn, you can't be the underdog, and unless your opponent then does a double turn. So, or your opponent immediately becomes an underdog. So they've really tried to make it so that you can't do, that you won't do double turns. And also they've added an elastic mechanic in. If you fall behind, then you obviously have got a way to recover. So those are the fundamental changes. They've also said that you don't need faction terrain to be in your list or for you to deploy it, which is good. We'll talk about that later. They've also changed covering fire, so that you can't redeploy and do covering fire, although they did accidentally leave in the FAQ where they said they could. So question mark around that right now. We'll approach that again in the future. So those are the kind of core fundamental changes to list building and the other little things. So that's the thing. Then they did big points changes across the board, which is cool. Let's talk about the major threats that are in the game. Nighthaunt, they changed how Discorporate works, and they also gave big points increases to several units, which is good. With Stormcast Eternals, they added a bunch of points on, which is good, specifically to long strikes and also Vanguard Paladors. Good. We love that. So those 2 are the major threats. Slaves to Darkness, unfortunately, absolutely nothing. 10 points on Vanguard. Incredibly disappointing, to be honest. Talking about some of the armies that aren't doing very well, they gave Ogres some punchiness, which is kind of fun. Again, I'll break this all down later. They have increased maybe how Soulblight Gravelords, they might have given, did some big points reductions on those as well. Ogres, they gave more mortal wounds on the charge, but only to monsters. Gits are about the same. I'm trying to think of some of the other factions as well. Stormcast Eternals, they reduced some points, try to give you some more list diversity. It's quite a lot of stuff to remember. Oh, Flesh Eater Courts. They did a big update to Flesh Eater Courts. They did big points reductions, and also you get more deed points as well. Skaven, yes, Skaven got massive points reductions as well. And also with the +2 move, you've got some different builds, and they put rattling guns up a bit, but probably not enough. So I think that's pretty cool. I think that's all I can remember off the top of my head. So you're going to have to watch the rest of the video now. But hopefully this has been a quick TLDR before the rest of the video, which I know is long, but you're going to have to get into it. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoy what I'm about to do for the next hour and a half. And if you want to support me on Patreon. That'd be great. Merry Christmas. Hope you have a nice time. So the first thing that we're going to cover in this FAQ update is we're going to talk about something that's going to affect absolutely everybody, and these are the seasonal rules. So if you are new to Age of Sigmar and you haven't been through the seasonal rule kind of situation before, normally what happens is they release something called the General's Handbook, which every 12 months or 6 months, they make big changes to how the game plays. Obviously, with the launch of Age of Sigmar 4, it was the Honor Guard rules and then it should have lasted, or most of it should have lasted, and it has kind of lasted until the summer of next year, so 2025, where we'll get a new General's Handbook. However, we've seen a massive change to some sections of how the game works with the seasonal rules, which does mean in the summer, some of these rules, or most of these rules, or all of these rules will go away. So this is like a 6-month change. And then they will have already written what those rules are like in the summer. And so, yeah, we've seen a big change to those. Okay, so what we've got is we've got 2 new abilities that we can assign to our army at the start. But before we get to that, let's have a look at seizing the initiative. I'd like to point out for people who are coming over from 40k or who have played previous games, this is not remotely related to any of the other abilities which have been called Seizing the Initiative. I would have really liked them to have just chosen a different name for this thing. Okay, this actually gets quite convoluted and is all focused around the priority roll. In my opinion, also, this is going to spell a death knell for the priority roll going forward. It very much seems like with the launch of Age of Sigmar 4 and also this rule, they aren't super interested in that. Okay, Seizing the Initiative. If the player who went second in the previous battle round wins the priority roll and chooses to go first, which is a double turn, that's what some people will call it in quotes, their opponent is the underdog until their opponent does the same. Super simple. When you do a double turn, the opponent becomes the underdog. What does the underdog do? Okay, cool. When you're the underdog, you get an extra command point every battle round when you generate command points, and you, on some battle plans, you get to choose some additional things that happen in the game. The idea is what's called an elastic mechanic, or sometimes referred to as the blue shell from Mario Kart. The idea is that if you're behind, the game rewards you for in a way to help you try to catch up. That's what the underdog mechanic is. So now if you get double turned, if a unit of Varangard, for example, charges across the board, fights you, gets a double turn, fights you again, uses their fight twice ability, so that's 3 activations, you now will get an extra command point in your turn. So it's not quite as a solid elastic mechanic as you would want it. However, on the other side of this, if a player is behind by 6 or more victory points, so 6 or more victory points, they do not suffer any penalty from taking 2 turns in a row. Normally, when you're taking a double turn, you aren't allowed to choose a battle tactic on the second time you take a turn. Therefore, that's gone now. Their opponent is not the underdog for the rest of the battle, so your opponent immediately loses the ability to ever be the underdog, and they can use the tactical gambit ability to pick a battle tactic. So, what does this all mean? It means that the underdog, if you're ever down by 6 points, you are the underdog, which means you could take double turns and still choose battle tactics, and also you're going to get a command point every turn. It's a very small change intrinsically, but actually it's quite a lot to remember and makes the priority roll quite convoluted, in addition to the convoluted nature of the priority roll anyway. So they've tacked on additional amount of bloat onto the priority roll. Now, some people are going to be super excited about this. I think there's always this mythos that's always pushed around with the priority roll that people at the end of a game, they want it to come down to the very last dice roll. The game has been so close and so tense. The final dice roll decides the game. And while that's a kind of beautiful kind of moment in time when that does happen, it does also negate all of the other decisions and priority rolls and dice rolls and other elements that have occurred over the past 3 hours of the game. It also does mean that games might end up being much closer, therefore much longer. But I'd love to know what you think, so let me know about seizing the initiative. Now, we're going past the priority roll and we're going into honor guard. So those are the seasonal rules. But don't forget, seizing the initiative is locked into the seasonal rules thing. So this could go away in the summer, but I expect it to not go away, and I think it will stay permanent for the rest of Age of Sigmar 4. Okay, Honor Guard. Each player can use one of the following Honor Guard abilities in each battle, and there are 5 now, more than 3, so 2 extra. When using the ability, they must pick a unit in their general's regiment to be the Honor Guard. Okay. So 1 unit in the general's regiment to be the honor guard. Fine. Okay, the next rule is regimented forces. If a player has more regiments than their opponent, and the way you build regiments, you have a hero and you have units in the hero's regiment, they can use a second different honor guard ability, but they must pick a unit that is in a different regiment that is not led by the general to be the honor guard for that ability. You cannot pick units in a regiment of renown to be an honor guard. Okay, so you can have 2 honor guard abilities. What is this solution trying to solve to what problem? The problem that we're talking about is the ability to have low drops. So when you build an army in Age of Sigmar 4, normally you'll build up to 5 regiments. The regiments are led by a hero and they're led by unit, and then there are units in the hero's regiments, with the general's regiment being allowed 4 units versus other ones which are 3. A regiment of renown is considered to be a regiment as well. So that's how you would do list writing. If I have less regiments than my opponent, that means I'm going to deploy, because you deploy a regiment like as one piece. You can actually deploy it individually, but let's not confuse the issue. I would deploy my 3 regiments, you would deploy your 4 regiments. That means I finished going first, which means I get to determine who gets the first turn. Who gets to decide who decides who gets the first turn means if I've got an army that's like an Alpha Strike army that's really good at charging, for instance, I might just deploy on the line and be like, I know I'm going to go first, which forces my opponent to deploy really deep and defensively. In another situation, my opponent knows that they're going to go first and they're just going to have a gun line, or they want to take a double and just try and like double smash. So they get to dictate the tempo of how the game works, especially on missions. This is trying to give some bonus to the other side of that, where if your opponent does get the choice to go first, you still get to choose 2 different honor guard abilities, and whether or not that balances out. So let me know what you think. Personally, the choice to go first is a much, much stronger effect. But however, they have done something. They have done something. So this is a bonus to that. It's a step in the right direction. That's how we'll describe it. Okay, so what are your honor guard abilities? So if you are already playing Age of Sigmar, you don't need me to help you out. The special assignment one, you pick what your honor guard unit, that has to be in your general's regiment, and you can get one of these additional bonuses, some of which will stack. Then on bodyguard, which normally is you subtract 1 from the attacks characteristic of enemy units' melee weapons while they're in combat with a unit leading that regiment if both of the following are true. The regiment's honor guard is wholly within 6 inches of the leader of that regiment, and neither that regiment's honor guard nor the regiment's leader charged this turn. So that's actually been a significant change, because previously you could charge your units in and still reduce the attacks coming back at the unit. So that's a big change to bodyguard, which was quite popular. And some of the most successful lists at the moment in Age of Sigmar, for example, Karazai and a unit of Praetors, would run around together and charge stuff, and they'd be like minus attacks, and they'd stack that. So that's really effective. So that's a good change to the bodyguard rule. Love that. And then priority target. Pick a friendly unit in, not leading a regiment to be the regiment's honor guard. You can pick a unit in reserve. Add 1 to hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made by the honor guard unit that target an enemy general or the enemy honor guard if it's in the enemy general's regiment, if the target of the attack is within 12 inches. So this, at the start of Age of Sigmar 4, was absolutely the most picked one, priority target, because people were doing it with shooting units, giving them +1 to hit and +1 to wound against all units in the enemy general's regiment. This now has been reduced down, so it's just the enemy general and the honor guard unit, and it's within 12 inches. So that's not as popular now. So that's already been FAQ'd. We've now seen bodyguard changed in this version. And then we've got two new abilities. So the first one is Field Sergeant. You pick a friendly, non-fly infantry hero in but not leading a regiment. So when you're doing your list writing, normally a hero leads a regiment, but there are some specific other heroes which can be taken in a regiment in addition. When I say for free, I don't mean points for free. I mean, they do not take up a slot, or they can be taken in addition. They don't need to lead a regiment, basically, which is kind of cool. And as of this FAQ today, when I'm recording, a host of new heroes have been added to armies. They're not new heroes that have been added, but they've been given the ability to also be added to regiments in the way I just described. So they've done this ability, Field Sergeant, and they've given loads more options to Field Sergeant. This is pretty cool. And you add 2 inches to the move characteristic of friendly, non-flying infantry units while they're wholly within 12 inches of the honor guard. This is pretty amazing. Some armies like Cities of Sigmar and Fire Slayers, which aren't doing very well, already will be super happy with this. Movement 6 Hammerers, as an example. In addition to some other armies like Ossiarch Bone Reapers and Seraphon, who already can have infantry units and also get additional moves. Skaven are going to be able to do something crazy, like I think I saw earlier someone say 10-inch clan rat movement in the opponent's turn. Because you've got the 3 claw steps ahead ability. So this is going to really open the game up. This seems like a really small change, and actually you have to take a 100 to 150 point hero to be able to unlock the ability to do this when you choose. But this is going to really explode the game. There's going to be a lot of different lists that maybe can do these things. Maybe we're going to see a push towards more infantry in that situation because this is only infantry locked. But yes, we're already in a very fast game. You've already got things like Prosecutors is an example that move 12 inches and they charge 3d6. This does also mean that we're going to be able to make Chosen, if we want, movement 6 and still 3d6 charge with a Saneshi banner. So there's already some units that are good, which are already going to get buffed. But this might open up more list building and more list writing for lots of people, which, considering list writing has been a little bit monosyllabic, this is definitely a great change for the game. So big thumbs up from me. Next up is Prize Beast. This one is a bit of a whiff, to be honest. You pick a friendly, non-unique monster. Almost guaranteed Games Workshop writes terrible monsters. It's like a foot heroes and monsters are Games Workshop's weakest writing. But not leading a regiment to be that regiment's honor guard. So a non-unique monster. You can pick a unit reserve. The unit can ignore the effects of battle damaged ability, which normally reduces how many attacks they have. In addition, add 1 to hit rolls for combat attacks made by the honor guard. This ability affects companion weapons. So it does mean you can have something really effective like a Help It Abomination with just a ton of attacks. Normally you can't get pluses to hit and wound and other stuff to companion weapons, or you can get +1 to hit from all that attack, but like it allows you to improve them. Kind of cool, kind of fun. Non-unique monsters. Do you want this? Let me know if you do want this. This is kind of interesting. Now, to kind of scroll back to the top, what this does mean is if you are less drops than your opponent, you're going to get to choose 2 of these abilities, which is kind of fun. The same honor guard unit can't be the same, like you can't have the same twice, same ability. So, but it does mean you can really have a high drop list and have maybe 2 very significant buffs, the movement buff and maybe bodyguard, or the movement buff and, give one of your units an additional buff as well. However, being less drops is probably still more effective than some of those changes, in my opinion. But the game is now broader, which is great. More options at list writing, I love. So overall, I think especially on the regiments and honor guard section, a positive change, not necessarily the change I would have done, but a step in the right direction. The seizing initiative and the priority roll thing, I think, is pretty negative, ultimately. I think this idea is about exponential growth. The idea is that more people, they want to get more and more new people playing the game, and the priority roll just puts them off, not the acres of rules they'll have to learn, or the 3-hour time frame, or the £600 entry point for an army. None of those things. It's definitely the priority roll that's stopping people playing. So we'll have to see what you think and have to see what everyone else thinks. I think that we're going to see a very, or potentially a very different meta because of Field Sergeant, which I think is fun. And let's go look at the rest of the changes. Right, before we get into some of the points changes, what we're going to do is we are going to break down some of the other changes in the core rules. And there are really only 2 major ones that I think are important. The first one is they've answered whether or not, as you can see here, whether or not setting up your terrain feature is mandatory. So if you are playing Ossiarch Bone Reapers as an example, then your terrain feature is not something you have to bring with you and is not mandatory to set up. This is good because, especially for casual players, because casual players will not understand this, some of your terrain features are bad. And what I mean by that is they give you a large area that your opponent can charge or even land near and use to slingshot off. That's because, and this you do not have to bring your terrain feature, is basically Games Workshop admitting that they have made a big mistake with the terrain feature rules. Because if they've sold you a £30, £40 piece of terrain feature and it's so unfunctional that it's actually a bonus to your opponent, so much so that you do not want to deploy it, and the fact that they've not made it mandatory feels like a bit of an admittance that they have made some mistakes on that front. So I would like to see some sort of overarching change to terrain features in the future, but I think that's something we're going to have to see in like a much bigger update. The other big change is to my least favorite rule in Age of Sigmar, the covering fire command ability, which is one command point ability to shoot in your opponent's turn with a missile unit, shooting at the closest target. And it's pretty strong. It should be 2 CP or maybe just gone from the game. However, they have changed it a small amount where you pick a friendly unit that did not use a run ability. A redeploy is also a run. So now there's no redeploys in effect and then shooting. So this is a small micro change to a command ability that should either be gone from the game or should be 2 command points. In my opinion, of course, everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be my opinion, but I think that would be a more healthy game state, the things I'm talking about. So that's changed. Something to think about. There we go. At time of recording, however, it does seem that Games Workshop have not deleted one of their earlier FAQs where can a unit use the covering fire command after using the redeploy command? The answer would be yes. So it does seem that we are currently on Schrodinger's point right now. And you both can and can't. I'm going to say can't because that's the most recent. And also it's just bad for the game. So no redeploy. I'm going to say it now. No redeploy and shoot. Just live with it. And covering fire. No redeploy and covering fire. Can't do it. Won't do it. Anyway. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the points changes for each of the factions and also the rules changes, and we'll do them simultaneously. BC Chaos, for example, didn't get any rules changes, but they did get points changes. I'd like to start out with saying congratulations to Games Workshop, because some of these changes are actually significant. I'm seeing some units move by 40 to 50 points, and this is the first time in a very long time I've seen that they've actually listened to actual feedback, and we're going to get some significant points changes. If you go and watch the other video where I talked about changes I'd like to see yesterday, I said this is something we'd never see, and this is something we have never seen. We are in new territory. Absolutely new territory where we're getting huge points changes, which is great for the game because it really might, if they're willing to move units by 40 to 50 points, that does mean that you're going to be able to really affect the internal balance of armies, and that's great. So this is a massive change. I can't tell you how exciting this is as an Age of Sigmar fan, as someone who does analysis for a living. Like, this is huge. This is really good. So I just wanted to just take the moment to just shout that out because that's good. And it's a new step. If they start doing this in the future, then maybe I won't whinge when they take the priority roll away. Who knows? Right, okay, so let's jump into it and let's look at Beasts of Chaos. What was the problem with Beasts of Chaos as an army, if you're talking about them in a competitive sense, which does also impact casual games? That would be that Bestigor, specifically 80 Bestigor, so spammed Bestigor, were winning loads of tournaments and were constantly doing really well. And because of that, Bestigor have gone up by 10 points. So the 80 Bestigor list has now gone up by 80 points. Does that mean that they're just going to take 70 instead? Probably. But maybe that's enough of a change to bring down how effective they were. Beasts of Chaos themselves were played by very few players, a really small meta representation, and also they had quite a high win rate for that meta representation, and that's because the players that were playing them were some world-class players. You had people like Gavin playing them, Nuge, Owen, like people pushing them. They were being played all around the world, so people were playing really hard, trying that to use that army really well. Other changes, Doomball, like the other changes are all nominal. They're either plus 10, minus 20, and most of those mean nothing. Like a Sigor down 20, a Gorgon down 20 doesn't mean much. When we're talking about actual lists and stuff that people are playing, Bestigor's the big change. Is that going to change them playing? I don't know, but considering Beasts of Chaos aren't legal after the summer next year, that might be enough, to get these people moving on to other armies. Now we're going to move over to Khorne. Khorne weren't doing very well in the game. A bunch of different reasons as to why. And we've got rules changes and points changes. Rules change, we've seen that their battle trait, which is when models die, units die, they generate blood tithe points. Normally, you were only able to do one blood tithe ability per turn. They've now changed that to one blood tithe ability per phase. Seeing as many of their abilities were in different phases, this means that you can potentially do quite a lot of extra stuff. The problem with Blood Tithe as a mechanic in of itself is that when Age of Sigmar 4 launched, you generally had more units, you had less units on the board because the points of everything kind of went up by 25%. Therefore, your access to Blood Tithe, or how much Blood Tithe you could generate, was lower. So Blood Tithe is still going to be difficult to generate, but you do have the ability now to do some little fringe case things, which is cool. Now let's go look at the points changes, and most of these are nominal outside of two specific exceptions. So Scarbrand went down 20 points, but that doesn't really mean anything in realistic list building terms. What does matter, I think, is that Wrathmongers, you can see down here, have gone from 140 points for 5 to 120 points for 5. Now, Wrathmongers do have a 5-up save, so they're fairly fragile. But with the removal of Battleshock from Age of Sigmar 3, this means Wrathmongers, you can put a lot of these guys down, and they already would feature in lists already. So you can put a lot of these dudes down if you wanted to go that way. I think also some people might be quite excited about Blood Crushers. They don't have a lot of impact, but maybe we'll see a pinning list come out of that sort of build as well. But Wrathmongers, I think, is the big one. And the other big one is the changes that I talked about earlier with list writing. So, as pointed out by Pershaw, Bloodthirster and Sense of Rage and a Bloodthirster and Fetid Fury can be taken as heroes in an eligible regiment as a Baleful Lord. It's kind of awkward. The Baleful Lord thing is like the word they use for like the free hero. Previously, if you wanted to run 4 Bloodthirsters, you had to have a 4-drop army. You can now run 4 Bloodthirsters as a 2-drop army. Now, that's actually quite exciting for me. I think that's one of the better and more fun lists in Age of Sigmar. People came up to me right now and said, Rob, I want to play Age of Sigmar. I just want to go smash face. I'd give them a 4 Bloodthirster list. It's super fun. I've played it myself in an event. Really cool. And I think it can win games. I think it's like a 2-3-3-2 army, and it's perfectly Destruction Brain. Now, it's a 2-drop. It's super interesting. Very, very interesting. But I love that. Cool. Nice changes for Khorne. Not everything that they needed. If you are a Khorne player, in the comments below, the changes you'd like to see. Next up, Disciples of Tzeentch. Disciples of Tzeentch were doing incredibly good in the game. They weren't the strongest army, but they were definitely a strong army. One of the things to talk about with Disciples of Tzeentch is they had quite a broad roster. They weren't quite as monosyllabic as something like Slaves to Darkness as an example. So you had a couple of different builds. Over the course of the past 6 months, we've had a bunch of Skyfires. We've also had big Zangor heavy blocks if you wanted to go for a more aggressive build. And then the past 3 months or so, we started to move into more of like a horrors, pink horrors, blue horrors situation. They've been hit pretty hard on the points list here, very aggressively, especially around the horrors. Blue horrors have gone up 20 points for 10. So when you used to see sometimes 20 to 40 blue horrors, you're looking at an 80-point lift. That's actually pretty egregious if you think about the only 10-point lift that we saw for Bestigor, when you would see 80. An entire list would only be that. So that's pretty egregious. And then also pink horrors, which you would take in unison with horrors, with blue horrors, also went up 20 points. So you're looking at something like a 10 to 20% lift in those specific lists, as well as the change to Kairos and Lord of Change going up 20 points. Those changes are nominal. Kairos will still get chosen at 460 as he would at 440. But they've pretty much destroyed the build around horrors, or they've at least made it not as good. Thankfully, though, Zangor, which was another build that would see a lot of play. Skyfires were a list we saw a lot as well. Sometimes we'd see up to 12 Skyfires. Not quite so much anymore, but we still would. They've gone up 10 points, so that would be like a 60-point shift on the list. But Zangor's on foot, which we still saw a lot of, haven't changed points at all. So those players that were still using them can still use them as well, which is fine. And then there's some other nominal points changes and points increases across the board, which is okay. Flamers going up 10 points. They, again, it's pretty crazy. You would normally see like 3 to 6 Flamers maybe in a list. Putting them up 10 points each adds 20 on the list. Again, with Bestigor and other examples I'll talk about later. I feel like Tzeentch got done hard a little here, but they were doing really well in the game. So, they were probably like second, third most successful army. So maybe people feel that they needed it. Let me know. They did have a rules change as well. Specifically, the rules change was to their Destiny dice. Previously, with their Destiny dice, when they used them to cast a spell, there wouldn't be any negative modifiers because of the way it was worded. So when you would do magical intervention, you wouldn't get a -1. Now, you will suffer modifiers, negative modifiers to your dice rolls, if they're affected by friendly abilities, and doing magical intervention is a friendly ability. So those are the changes. So Tzeentch hit pretty hard, actually. Tzeentch hit pretty hard. Let me know what you think about it. So Slaanesh weren't an army that were doing badly. but they were an army. They weren't doing great. Let's say they definitely weren't in the worst section, but they were towards the bottom of the okay section. So they definitely needed something. So we have got a rule change for Slaanesh where their ability, Euphoric Killers, where a unit can have crit 2 hits, the unit's weapons, including companion weapons, have crit 2 hits. So it's changed. Normally they would give a unit crit 2 hits, but it wouldn't affect the companion weapons. Now, companion weapons can have crit 2 hits. That's pretty cool, especially when some units like Slickblade Seekers have the mount and the rider. Maybe that keeps them up with the same sort of cavalry units that we'd see previously. So that's okay. Also, I think... yes, and also we should say that Glutos and all of Glutos's weapons also have companion weapons, and I think Glutos is a big standout in this army as well. So that's another good take, as well as Slangor. Basically, that's a fix to a badly written allegiance ability that they did previously, where many of their units didn't have the ability to use their main allegiance ability. So it's a great change. Big thumbs. We love that. When it comes to the points, very interesting. So Sinessa and Dexessa, 2 units that are taken together, have had to have massive rules changes. 50 points for Sinessa, Dexessa down 40 points. Does that make either of them viable? Not really. Like they're not good at all. And then we talked about this when we did the review for their War Scrolls. But that is recognition that they're not very good and some significant points changes. So actually, I'm vibes on that, and I think that's actually pretty good. At least you now aren't punished as heavily by 90 points for taking both incredibly good-looking models. Keeper of Secrets went down 20 points. It featured in every single competitive list, I would say. So, like... it went down, which is good for the army. Comparatively to other armies, then it's a bit silly, but whatever. Glutos didn't change points, which is good. I think Glutos is really good, so keep that 470. Maybe you could come a bit cheaper as well if we wanted to. The big changes to units is Demonettes got 10 points cheaper. Demonettes have a kind of a race to the bottom situation at the minute where they're really good if you buff them up and you charge them in, but probably they're going to die before they get into combat because they have a really weak save. So making it so that, you can have 40 Demonettes as an example with 40 points cheaper. I don't know if that's really going to make any difference. Painbringers came down 10, so if you want to stack a bunch of Painbringers, maybe. Slangor Fiendbloods also came down 10 as well, but their War Scroll's pretty garbage, so I wouldn't be taking those. Good news, though. Sigvald has become a dark egotist, which is again that ability to take that kind of free little hero in a regiment, which is cool for Sigvald. Sigvald probably could have come down some points as well. That would have been fun, but it does mean you can have like a kind of a Keeper of Secrets Sigvald combo, which is kind of cool. I don't hate that. But yeah, I would say the point changes for Slaanesh are like fine. There's not really much to sing about here, but their allegiance ability now works better. And it's not like people weren't doing okay sometimes with Slaanesh. It's just a really fragile, really difficult army to play because it's not very good, got a very good save. And its recursion is only built into half of the army in the demons from a Keeper of Secrets, and the mortal side doesn't have any of that, doesn't have any recursion. So it needs to start moving towards being as cheap as stuff like cities, because if you can't bring it back from the dead, then when other armies can bring back several hundred points worth of stuff, you need to have cheaper units at the start. You need to front load your points advantage. But this is a good change generally for Slaanesh. Maybe not enough. We'll have to see. Next up, Maggotkin and Nurgle. Again, they were in that section where they were doing okay, but they weren't necessarily like top of the pops. Okay, so we got some rules changes and some points changes, and the rules changes could be pretty effective. The first one is just a little bit of a clarification on Desperate Remedies, which is an allegiance ability, where manifestations and faction terrain cannot be given the disease keyword by any friendly abilities. Actually, would be pretty fun if you could cast a diseased manifestation and also then start doing disease points on your opponents. But that's gone. You can't do that. They've also made it so that both Plague Drones and Puskal Blightlords have got 2-inch coherency range, which is actually quite interesting for the ability to create move blocking or even just alpha pinning armies potentially. But they didn't see any points changes on either of those 2 units, so I'm not sure if we'll see those. That's probably just more of a function on the table change. But the big news is the change to the spell Law of Malignance, where you change the effect of the spell Fleshy Abundance to pick one of the following. Previously, it was you had to heal. If a unit was wounded, you had to heal or they could be -1 to be wound. Now you can choose between either heal D3 to the target or subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks that target until the start of your next turn. The reason that that's a really good ability is Puskul Blightlords are pretty good already. Now you can make it so that they're -1 to be wounded, which is pretty good. And in addition, with magical intervention, you can cast it your opponent's turn on a second unit. So elements of your army could be -1 to wound, which, as we know with these kind of like racial hits into wounds, some armies really, really struggle, and making it so maybe that they don't wound on 4s, they wound on 5s could be pretty game-changing. Also just means that some of your units are going to be much more defensive, which is what Nurgle want. They've also got some points reductions across the board, but none of them are remotely impactful. You're not very easy to get many of these units, another extra unit in this army. But the big news, in my personal opinion, is the fact that now, with the new seasonal rules and the ability to have the sergeant that makes unit move 2 extra inches, this means that some of your Nurgle armies are going to be able to move straight up the board. If you're taking a bunch of Plague Bearers, they're now moving 6, which is super good. If you're taking Puskul Blightlords as well, you can move them up the board that much faster. That's pretty good. So I think we might see the Nurgle be much more effective. People have lots of Blightlords at home already, fully painted up, because it used to be really good. So I think we might see like the rise of Nurgle over the next few months. Next up, we're going to do Skaven. Skaven have got some rules changes, and most importantly, the Turbo Vermin Lord, that is Lord Screech Vermin King, is now thankfully better than just some random grey wizard, because he's gone from a Wizard 1 to a Wizard 2, which is good. We like that as well. They've also changed the ranges on both the Plague Furnace and the Screaming Bell. Important if you're going to take them. But where we get a whole new Skaven army, really, is in the point changes. Significant. And I want to start out again by saying I'm impressed. Genuinely impressed. Claw Lord down 20. Claw Lord on Norby's down 30. Still garbage. Deathmaster down 40. That's right. A random Skaven assassin down 40 points. This is actually something pretty big. Kritok Foulblade, the new guy, down 40 points. That's pretty huge, from 220 to 180. Do I still think he's really viable? I'm not really sure. But especially because Kritok you would take with the Storm Vermin, and Storm Vermin have also gone down 20 points for 10. So you're going to be making a 40 points saving on those. So that's huge. Let's just go back up and keep going through these changes. Vermin Lord, all the Vermin Lords have got cheaper. Most of them. The Corruptor's down 30. The Wartbringer is down 30. Which is good, because they were just randomly more expensive for no real reason. Big news is Vizic, though, the new model, down 50 points. Down from 450 to 400, which is great. Love to see that, and I feel that that's in keeping with how they really want that army to play. I feel like Vizic was the missing piece in that army, and not what we ended up seeing, where we saw a bunch of Rattling guns. Bombardiers and Warlock Engineers also, and a Warlock Galvanier also can be included as those little foot heroes as well. Acolyte Globadiers went down an incredible 30 points, which is wild, from 130 for 5 to 100 points for 5. That's a massive, massive change, which previously we've never seen changes like it. Brood Terror's down 40, but it still sucks. Doomwheel down 20 is good. Help It down 30 is good. Plague Claw down 20. The big news, and keep going. Rattling Warp Blaster down 30, still just a meme build. Storm Vermin down 20, like I said, really good. Warp Grinder down 30, and Warp Lightning Cannon down 20, all excellent changes. And the Rattling Guns have gone up 20. So what they've done, I think, is they've really started to push towards a better bit of internal balance, where you've got more infantry builds and more stuff that you can take. The real situation here is that Rattling Guns, even at 20 points extra, you take 6 Rattling Guns, you pay an extra 40 points. You can save that in other places now on this list, which is fine. But I still think, even if you were to take 12 Rattling Guns, which is something we saw a lot, you're only adding 80 points to your list, and they're still so effective. You probably will still see Rattling Guns see play, to be honest. Maybe not as much, but maybe still a lot. But this has opened up, potentially, more combat builds with Storm Vermin. And then one thing to say about Skaven, wholesale, most of these units are infantry. So that plus 2-inch movement could be very, very effective for this army. They've got a stronger wizard in Screech, although we talked about how fundamentally not good his core ability is on Screech. So because his core kind of war scroll ability, so maybe that's not going to work, being a 2-cast wizard but still having a main garbage ability. But points across the board down for people wanting to play Skaven combat, which is good because I think that's how a lot of people want to play. One of the most successful and popular armies, Slaves to Darkness, just got their most recent book, where we didn't see many changes to them, and the popular units, and arguably some of the best units in the game, Chosen, Slaves to Darkness, and Be'lakor, have propped up in competitive Age of Sigmar all across the world. They are arguably one of the best armies around. So to see what the points changes, no rules changes, let's go look at what the points changes have done. So we've got some nominal changes to some units that can become heroes in regiments if you want them to be. And there are big points changes, sweeping points changes to the Dark Oath range, like a Dark Oath Chieftain, Dark Oath War Queen are all down 20. That's not really a big deal. The Exalted Hero Chaos is up 10 points in case he turns into a Demon Prince, which is pretty cute. Chaos Furies are up 10 points. These were units that were chosen for battle tactics. So fine. But Dark Oath Marauders have gone down 20 points. The big problem with Dark Oath Marauders is not that they are 80 points is really cheap for a unit of Dark Oath Marauders. The big problem with Dark Oath Marauders is that they don't start as a unit of 20, upgradable to a unit of 40. That's where they really fall down. They also, if you want another comparison, they also can never do the volume of output that something like Daughters of Cain can, so a unit of 10 Witch Elves. So they're not built like Witch Elves. They don't have the ability to fight twice like Witch Elves. So, and they don't have the survivability and depth in numbers like you get with Clan Rats. So they are... And they don't have 2 wounds each, like something like Zangor. So they are just intrinsically not well built from the rules perspective. So you really need them to start as a unit of 20, in my opinion. Dark Oath Savages is the same thing. And then Dark Oath World of Fiend down 10 points is nothing because it's really bad. Right, okay. Raptrix went up 10 points as well. And the important news is Varangard went up 10 points. So a unit, so a good comparison, actually, internal in a book that's got probably the worst internal balance in the game, is comparing Varangard to Dark Oath as an example. So in a list, I probably would only ever have a reinforced unit of Varangard, maybe 2. But if I was to have 2 reinforced units of Varangard, that's going to have affected my list by 40 points. So it's 40 points more expensive. Now, with Dark Oath Marauders, if I was to have myself 4 versions of Dark Oath Marauders, I have saved myself 80 points. However, I've only spent something like 320 points with the Dark Oath Marauders, and with the Varangard, I'm close to having spent like half my army in points. Problem is the Marauders just suck. I actually did a Patreon video about this, comparing specifically these 2 units fighting against each other. In every situation, you can sometimes throw 2 to 3 times the number in points of Marauders against Varangard, and Varangard will beat them. And I'm not talking, so if you have like 660 points worth of Varangard, they can beat something like 1,800 points worth of Marauders, like in a straight fight. So there's like a not good comparison between them. Varangard also like intrinsically are just so much better than many other combat units in the game. Great armor save, but the ability to fight twice, right, is where the real structural issue comes from this unit. And the fact that then also Chosen weren't affected as well. I would say that having just been this battle scroll coming out very close to the battle tome release, maybe we'll see a balance or kind of a swing pass for this army in 3 months, maybe in 6 months' time. But seeing as this army is incredibly good, and the units that and the lists are always the same. They're literally identical all of the time. It's Be'lakor, which didn't go up points, and Be'lakor's the best war scroll in the game, hands down. No arguments. And there's cross-faction stuff, but so good. So this is a big mess here. They obviously want Slaves to Darkness to be in the position that Slaves to Darkness are in. They want you to take lots of Varangard. They want you to take lots of Chosen. If they were being really sexy, they could have maybe had the Ogroid Therodons drop 10, 20 points. Reason is because Therodons now, with the new banners and how everything work, are a genuinely different option. You maybe would have exploded out. Like the list writing and maybe a little bit more different. And also, if you're Slaves to Darkness fan, you're over the moon. You don't have to build or paint anything new. So you're super hype. So like, that's good. And if you're a Dark Oath fan, you could genuinely try to put literally hundreds of Dark Oath on the board, which is cool, but probably not very good. Flesh Eat Courts fans, you are eating well. You are eating well because you got massive points changes, and you also got some excellent rules changes as well. So Flesh Eat Courts, you've got a new battle trait called Address Loyal Subjects. Many people have told me that this is something that was in 3rd edition, and like, I didn't review the 3rd edition book, but I appreciate them telling me anyway. Anyway, once per turn for your army in your hero phase, you pick a friendly Flesh Eat Courts hero to use this ability. Roll a dice for each other friendly Flesh Eat Courts unit wholly within 12 inches of that hero. And for each 5+, you gain 1 noble deed point to that hero. Great way to start generating noble deed points even from the start of the game. Cool. Very good. Very healthy. Great. And also Grand Justice Gormane. So this is the unique character. So he isn't going to be able to be your character that might also give +2 movement to your army, but +2 movement to infantry Flesh Eater Courts could also be good as well. Anyway, for the Grand Justice Gormane, basically his ability works exactly the same. However, if you do roll the 3+ for his ability, you also gain a deed point. So we're laughing. Good. More deed points for the army. Cool. What else do we get? Well, you get a load more. Well, you probably get 1 extra unit for your army, but you get some big points drops. The ones to really shout out about, in my opinion, is Nagash is 40 points down in this army. Ushran is down 30 points in this army. Courtier is down 20 points. Crypt Flayers are down 20 to only 150. It's pretty interesting. You would already see quite a lot of those anyway. Morbeg Knights are down 10 points. And while 10 points is pretty nominal, we would see a lot of Morbeg Knights in lists that did well. 2 units to 6 Morbeg Knights is going to save you 40 points. Take Ushran, that's going to save you 70 points already. And you've only spent 1,000 points at that point. I said point too many times there, sorry. And then, so you are able to save a lot, and potentially you're going to add another unit, maybe upgrade a couple of units. The upgrading units are a bit difficult in this army, but a lot more stuff. And the stuff that you can maybe add into your army has also got cheaper. So if I was a Flesh Eater Courts fan, I would be super happy about Christmas because it's all looking good. The army was doing okay, not great, but there were some armies that were doing well. Specifically, they were built around Morbeg Knights and Ushran. All that's cheaper now. So more units on the board, more deed points, could be really good for them. The next army we're going to look at are Nighthaunt. Nighthaunt are the best army in the game currently. They have a 61% win rate, which is something like 6% above like even where we would want them to be. So very, very effective. And so they got some major points changes, and they got a big rules change. Big rules change they got was the change to the commandability Discorporate, not commandability. So it used to be a reaction Discorporate. Well, it's a command ability because it requires a command point, but it was a reaction anyway, where you could give a 5-up ward save to a unit. Now, you can only give the 5-up ward save to the Nighthaunt unit in any hero phase, and it costs you that command point. So now you've not quite got the ability to be more tactile with exactly where you're going to get that 5-up ward save. You've got to pick a unit in the hero phase and be like, that unit's going to have a 5-up ward save. So that's a little bit difficult. That means your opponent can just avoid the unit it doesn't want to fight, as an example, potentially. So that's a big change to Discorporate. And then there were some points changes. The biggest points change, there's a lot of red on the screen, but actually the only thing that really matters is Bladegeist Revenants, you can see here. And maybe also the Cavalry. We'll talk about that in a second. So Bladegeist Revenants, you would often see 60 Bladegeist Revenants. So now, with 60, that means that's 120 points worth of difference to the lists. And then also, Hex Race went up 20 as well. But Bladegeist Revenants are pretty much, they went from 160 to 180. And you can pretty much chop and change them immediately if you want to with Grimghast Reapers, which have gone up to 150. So Reapers are cheaper than the Bladegheists were. They're cheaper now with a points increase than what they were previously. Maybe they've not quite got the same utility, but if it is just about bodies on the board, Hex Race gone up 20 points per 5. Seeing as sometimes you used to see 30, That means that's another 120 points list. That would be a slightly different list. That's another 120 points lost. And then with some of the characters that you would also see losing points, you've probably lost either a reinforcement to one of your units or something else. And then with the change to Discorporate, will that be enough to bring down that 5%, 6% off the top in order to make them not as effective? We'll have to see. Also, I think people generally tend to start moving away from armies where they become harder and harder to use and start jumping somewhere else. But not bad. But we'll have to see if it's enough to absolutely take out still the best army in the game. Next, we are going to be looking at Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Again, an incredibly successful army right now. Mainly, it would feature around having 30 Death Riders run up the board, but that was kind of early in the edition. We started to move towards having either the Mortek Crawlers, specifically made famous by Jesper over from Sweden, but we've seen them become more and more popular, or we would see very much a 4 Morghast Archai, kind of the backbone of several different OBR lists as we move forward. Interesting. Okay, so Ossiarch Bone Reapers have had a rules change in that they got a change to the Harvester. Gothizzar Harvester has been made now where it would generate deed points if a model was slain while it was within combat range of the Harvester. Now is if the units is within combat range. Used to be you could pull models away from not where the Harvester was, so it wouldn't generate deed points. So they've made it so the Harvester is a little bit better. And also made the Harvester cheaper. I think the idea here is to make it so that you take a bunch of Mortek Guard with the Harvester and you build a slightly different build to what we would see previously. Then we have the different, we had some of the units that we would feature a lot, like the Terratic Cohort went up 10 points. And then we see Nagash, who does have different points values now in different armies, go up 20 points. That going up at the same time as Death Riders going up 20 points means that if you were to run the 30 Death Riders and Nagash list, now you've gone up 140 points, so it's probably not viable, really. But you might still just see 20 Death Riders because they're very, very good. Katakros also went up a nominal 20 points. OBR has always been a really elite army with really good armor saves and good output. I think they're still going to be fine. I think they're in a good spot. I don't think this is they want you to side grade into taking Mortek Guard, but I don't think you will. I don't think that's going to be the case. So people are still going to run what they were running or something similar, not the 30 Death Riders. So I think Bone Reapers will be fine. For all you fans of My Chemical Romance and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Soulblight Gravelords are crushing it in this update with some massive points reductions across the board. Some of them are absolutely huge. We'll skip some of these little ones, like a Coven Throne going down 20, and a Via Volga, and also Kritzer for no reason going down 30 points. 70 points is great for doing any battle tactic, so worth a look at least. But when we get to Lucavi, gone down 50 points. Lucavi is now 270 points, and I think is at least worth a relook at. Going down also to a Vengorilord, who's also going down to 50 points from 300 to 250. So I think that there's something genuinely worth looking at there. Genuinely worth looking at. Also, shout out to Radikar the Beast, down 30 points. I absolutely adore that War Scroll. If you want like a fun army or a fun War Scroll to add to your army, I think the Beast is super worth it. So on the hero section, there's been some significant changes. Also, a bunch of different units were added to be able to take special characters or whatever characters, so you can maybe get the ability, the the seasonal rules for +2 move are going to be very impactful, I think, on some builds for these different armies. Because when we start looking at things like a Skirgan Trueblades, who went down 20 points, Corpse Cart went down 20. Most of the other infantry units didn't change, but now with the Lash and also with that +2-inch move at the start, you potentially are going to push these guys really far up the board really early. Specifically the Graveguard, zombies and skeletons, if that's what you're trying to do. Oh yes, and Neferata as well. But you're going to use Neferata to push stuff forward. So the big question is this enough? Because this is a real yo-yo army. Are you back? At the start of the game, massive. The entire game was focused around Torgillis the Chamberlain and also the battle trait to be able to return models back. And that got mega nerfed multiple different times. And it's clear Games Workshop have said to themselves, okay, well, like that was too strong, but also we really, really overestimated how good our monsters were going to be, which they do a lot. So massive point changes, like I say, on the Vengori Lord. No rules changes for this army. Big changes there. Big changes on Lukovai and some. Belladama down 10 means nothing really. But like, you know, you've got some points changes here that you might be able to get another single unit in the army, and also you're able to move a little bit faster. That might be enough to get Soulblight Gravelords out of the grave. Let me know. If you're a Gloomspite Gitz fan, I gotta say, I think that you are in a great place. You did get one rule change to the Loon Boss on Mangler Squigs, where you get +1 to hit instead of +1 to wound. Fine. Big news is your Rock Guts, though, didn't get hit at all with any points changes. Your Dan Cold Trog Boss did get 10 points. That's fine. Mangler Squigs got pretty significant points reductions. Down 40 points for the Loon Boss on Manglers, and down another 40 points on just the regular Manglers. Is this worth taking them? Probably not. They wrote their war scroll really badly. I don't think they even have Rend on their balls and chains, which is insane. They also reduced the points on the spiders. But again, you're not going to take the spiders, not when Rock Guts and Squigs exist. They did put the points up on the Squig Herd, which is going to affect lists like a tiny amount. Sometimes you would see like 2 reinforced units in a list. But the big news is that your Rock Guts didn't get any cheaper, or they didn't get any more expensive. Neither did your regular Goblins either, so you're in a good spot. Your Loon Smasher Fanatics did get cheaper, which is pretty nice. Don't hate that either. So genuinely, you're doing great if you're a Gloomspite Gitz fan, and you have a whole new part of your army coming out soon with all the Sun Goblins. So Gloomspite Gitz looking really good. No additional rules for the Iron Jaws, but we did get points reductions. But yes, Iron Jaws are not doing very well in the game right now at all. They're one of the worst performing armies, but they do have a new book coming out in January. So we might see some significant changes to the rules then. We haven't seen that with the Battle Tome so far, but we might. Okay, Iron Jaws, what did we get? We got a 50-point reduction on Godrak, which is fine. Godrak is one of those like combat characters that you would like probably be happy to pay 500 points for, but just make him really, really strong. He's the Fist of Gork. Instead, they didn't do that. Mega Boss got cheaper. Mega Boss on Maw Crusher got cheaper, 360 points, which means we might be in the 5 Mega Boss on Maw Crusher territory, if you would like to go that way, which is kind of crazy. Genuinely very crazy. And then anyway, yeah, you can have lots of those. The big crime here is, this is a personal thing, so take this with a pinch of salt, is that they didn't half the points on the big pigs. So Tush Boss or More Grunter to go down 20 points, but I would like to see him probably sit around 180 points, maybe 160. And then the More Grunter Gougers and the More Grunter with Hacking Crew went down 10 and 20 points. Again, they probably should be sub 200 points. Probably the More Grunter Gougers, probably more sat around the 150, 140 mark. And More Grunter Hacking Crew, probably down around 180. Source, I have an entire army of them and they suck. But the big news here, if you're not a big pig, oh my God, if you're not a big pig fan like me, you probably sing the Hakuna Matata song, is Brutes and their cost, really. Brutes and Hard Boys. Brutes are your chosen, as an example. And the thing that I'll leave you with when talking about Iron Jaws, which aren't doing very well, let's talk about the fact that Iron Jaws can go a little bit faster now. 2-inch move might genuinely really help this army. 2-inch move on the infantry units when you've got Hard Boys, Ragers, Brutes, all those units that can go a little bit faster now. Big thumbs up. We love that. That's great. But the question I'll ask you, if you are an Iron Jaws fan who's watching this, would you pay an extra 60 points per 5 Brutes if they could fight twice once per battle, like Chosen? I think the answer would be yes. The point is with Chosen, as an example, compared to Brutes, is that for an extra 60 points, you do get that fight twice. But in addition, you get the ability to give them a banner, which makes them go 3d6 charge, as an example, which is insane, with +1 attack on the charge. Brutes, you don't get that. You've got to do a lot of extra stuff to make that happen. So Iron Jaws need a rewrite, and they are getting a rewrite in January. So we'll put a pin in this and come back to it. But I would have liked to have seen more, especially around the pig section, because I would like to run loads of big pigs. Also, the Cruel Boys are about to get they'll be part of the Orc War Clans book, so they will get their rules changed in January, or maybe the same. But they have got points changes, and I think the thing that's got most people excited is Gobsprak is 30 points cheaper, and the Killer Boss and Corpse Ripper Vulture can now be a hero that joins his regiment for the Double Bird Bonanza. Is it good? No. But could you do it? Yes. And that is what's fun. Outside of that, we got some small points changes on heroes, and also Hobgrot Slitters got 10 points cheaper. Really, the Hobgrot Slitters have got the same problem that we discussed with the Dark Oath, where you really need them to be units of 20, reinforceable up to a unit of 40, to give yourself like these big bricks, which would be fun as well. Cruel Boys are doing okay in the game. They're not doing terrible. They're not doing great. And their allegiance ability is pretty random with those dice rolls, so that makes them a little bit more difficult. But genuinely, Gut Rippers aren't bad. And Bolt Boys also bring this army up as well. I think the main problem here is like the allegiance abilities are good, but not statically impressive. And the support that you can bring to this army is a little bit weaker than for some other armies. But they're in an okay position, and they're about to get a new book. Massive changes to the Ogre Moor tribes, which is cool. They have got a rules change. So if you weren't fan of an ogre and mainly enjoyed the monster the ogre rode on, which is basically how ogres played for 9 out of 10 years, 9.5 years out of 10 years that Age of Sigmar was viable, then you are going to be really excited because they've got a big new change to their Trampling Charge, which is a battle trait ability. So if you go look at the battle traits, the Trampling Charge means that when you charge in with a unit, either an Ogre or a Rhinox unit, then on a D3, on a 2+, you inflict that amount of mortal damage. However, they've changed this so that they've added that if you are on a monster, you can add 2 to this, which means you do an average of 4 to 6, or it's some amount of mortal wounds, and you can never fail the mortal wound impact hits. So that's a lot of mortal wounds on the charge, which is pretty good, meaning you potentially can wipe out monsters or other units before they even swing back at you. Is 4 to 6 mortal damage on the charge enough? We'll have to find out. They've also reduced the casting value needed for the increased value for some of the prayers. And we've seen some points reductions as well. And the first one we'll go to is Ogre Gluttons, who got that egregious 30 point uplift in the last battle scroll. They've gone down 10. So they're now at 240. I would have liked to have seen that back to where it was previously. They weren't exactly setting the world on fire. Mournfang down 20, I think, is actually a competitive points reduction, and we should look at that. Iron Blasters and Yetis all down 20, along with the Gorge and Moor pack. I really like the Gorge and Moor pack being down 20. I think that's really good for for that unit. They're pretty good. They can't be reinforced, the Gorge and Moor pack, and they're pretty decent, I'd say. Then Tyrant's gone down 20, but still sucks. Bloodpower Hunter down 20 as well. They've also changed some of the units that could be ensconced in other regiments as well over here, which is cool. So for Ogres, kind of some okay changes, but they are doing really badly. One of the worst performing armies in the game. Very, very bad. And I don't think this is necessarily going to be enough to increase them. But we'll see. I'm really hopeful, but I'm pretty certain there's going to be an entire Ogre range refresh during the Age of Sigmar 4 life cycle. So maybe that's when we're going to wait to see the real spice for Ogre Moor tribes. Gargants, they have changed they've changed some rules. So you've got to do Gargant Charge, which is cool. And you can do it, change Gargant Charge ability to any charge phase, which is fun. And in addition, they've changed some of the points around, which is cool. Gargants are pretty tragic, not gonna lie. They've also added 2 to the stomp attacks for the Almighty Stomp and the Almightier Stomp. That's important to know. And they've also changed the attacks characteristic of the Beast Smasher Mega Gargant to 5. But they still do some pretty tragic damage, and maybe the new seasonal rules will be able to help one of these out. But I'm just going to say that they're probably going to stay bottom of the pile. Next up, Cities of Sigmar. Oh, my favorite army. Okay, so we got some rules changes. The Fusum Major on Warhawk the Fusum Major on Ogre Warhawk is about to become a hot topic of conversation in the gaming sphere. What's happened is the effect of his marked target ability used to be +1 to hit rolls for shooting attacks that also targeted that unit, but now it's +1 to hit rolls for all attacks, which also means combat attacks, which is good because your army is terrible at hitting things. Your elite cavaliers only hit on 4s, and so do your steel helms as well if you're going for humans. Your hammerers, which you love and are very good, they hit on 4s as well. So now if you saw Major Warhawk, +1 to hit, they're hitting on 3s, which is good. But you can also get that from just an all-out attack. It's kind of fine. I guess the idea is that you shoot it, and then everyone shoots it and fights it in this kind of concentrated fire. So I think a lot of people are going to be talking about it. I think it's a bit of a red herring. Talia Vedra got a rework on her once per game ability, where you change the effect of lead from the front for each target. So what you would do is you would pick 3 units, hold 3 cities of Sigmar units. Sorry. Let me just go bring Talia's war scroll up again so you can see what I'm talking about. You would pick 3 cities of Sigmar units, holding them 12 inches, and they get +1 to wound rolls for that unit for the rest of the turn, and they gain a 5-up ward save for the rest of the turn, not until the start of your next turn. So if you wanted to rush her in with a bunch of cavaliers and then get +1 to hit because a Fusil Major shot, and then they get +1 to hit, +1 to wound, which means that elite cavalry unit is now just hitting what other elite cavalry units are on, so it's 3s and 3s. So I'm not really sure that's very effective. Now, there were some big points drops as well. Like an assassin came down 30 points. The points drops came down on everything. Pontifex Sinestra went from 240 to 200. Steam Tank Commander from 310 down to 280 as well. And then we saw some points drops on the Cavaliers, down 10 points. Command Corps down 30 points. Steel Helms down 10 points, so they're 90. Steel Helms' problem is not that they're 90 points for 10, it's that they're not 180 points for 20, reinforceable up to 40. That might start making it a really interesting option, but they unfortunately didn't have that as well. They did put points up on units that you saw a lot, which are hammerers, because hammerers are really good and would feature in some good lists. They also reduced down the Steam Tank and also the Charybdis and War Hydra, but please don't go and buy those. The Ironwell Great Cannon also came down 20 points. Now, Cities of Sigmar was already a really, really cheap army, because you couldn't do any recursion or healing afterwards, so you would front load a lot of the points. But in being cheap, they also weren't very good and are one of the worst performing armies in the game. Now, that doesn't mean people weren't doing well with them, but they were mainly doing well with the hammerers and executioners where they were seeing them. Ultimately, I think this is a book that probably needs a rework from the ground up. They need to rethink about how they stack buffs on these units, unit sizes, and a bunch of other things as well. So unfortunately, I don't think this is enough of a change for cities. And this is speaking as someone who owns an entire cities army, is super excited about it, love it to pieces. It's just unfortunately right now not structurally built well. These points changes, I think, won't make enough of a difference. Next up, Daughters of Cain. And we didn't really have many points changes here. They've got a really good combat block in both the Snakes and the Witch Elves, but they're a little bit fragile compared to the other combat bruiser units that you can see across all of Age of Sigmar. The Heartrenders and Life Takers came down 10 points, which is good because they're your battle tactics. You want those as well. The Gladiatrix and Cruethsa came down points. Cruethsa's pretty good now, 150. Big change probably, though, for Daughters of Cain is the ability to get that +2 move on your Daughters of Cain infantry, which means they're more likely to get into combat, which is good because when they get into combat, they will absolutely delete stuff. So their threat range being bigger is good. So Daughters of Cain might be a little bit better. Not to compare elves to dwarfs, but now we're going to look at fire slayers. But yeah, fire slayers are struggling to fight. Oddly, they are fragile and they really, really struggle. They need a rework as a book from the ground up. But the idea is that you can give them +2 move and make them maybe a little bit more fighty. Some stuff came down points, as you can see, but it's a bit of a race to the bottom with what should be elite infantry becoming incredibly cheap. So they become like an elite infantry / horde unit, which I think becomes a problem. Fire Slayers need a big rewrite ground up, but I hope the Fire Slayers changes are enough for Fire Slayers players. Let me know, please. They're not doing very well in the game as we talk about it. And Deepkin also didn't get any rules changes, but what they did get was a couple of points changes. Don't forget, right now, Deepkin are currently in vogue, especially in competitive settings. You're seeing, and Deepkin, this is maybe the best time Deepkin's ever had in the game. That we do have a lot of eel spam happening, so Ishlingard and Morsargard are really popular, but they're being led by normally an Eidolon of the Sea and an Eidolon of the Storm. So you're normally seeing both those two units as well. You're not seeing a lot of Reavers. You're not seeing a lot of Thralls, but you're also seeing a lot of Reavers. You sometimes are seeing the odd Alapex or Leviathan, but not really. And sometimes you'll see Volturnus or you'll see an Achillean King. Maybe Volturnus is actually what you see, not the King. So it's actually pretty good time to be an Eidolon Deepkin player. You get to paint up those two beautiful Eidolon models, and they're good, and they play. You get to have two different types of eels running around the board, which is good, and sometimes a turtle. It's not bad. It's not as balanced as some of the other armies, and they're also doing pretty good in the game. So that's decent. So Deepkin are in an okay position. I don't think they needed many changes. They didn't get many changes, so I'm not too mad about that either. Next up, we've got Caradron Overlords. And while not many people play them, people who do play them absolutely love them. And they've got a buff, at least when it comes to rules. They've got the new bonus or change is to their battle trait Sky Vessel Cover. Now, this isn't cover. This is a special rule that's unfortunately got the cover word in, where you used to subtract 1 from hit rolls for shooting attacks. Now, you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks while they're wholly within 6 inches of a Sky Vessel, which means if you charge any of the Caradron Overlord dudes while they're near the Sky Vessel, they're going to be -1 to hit. That's a nice, pretty aggressive change, which for an army is actually doing pretty well. We all thought Caradron Overlords were going to do really badly at the start of the edition. They don't have access to manifestations or wizards unless they bring in a wizard through a Regiment of Renown. They don't play in that portion of the game and generally struggle always with being able to grab objectives. But loads of Thunderers, it turns out, in a boat is still really good, and shooting your opponent off the board is excellent as well. They're not going to be able to necessarily take a lot of advantage from some of the seasonal rule changes, and might genuinely be really hurt by being an underdog. An underdog. Sorry, the opponent being an underdog constantly, but we'll have to see. That portion of the game is going to be really interesting. So I think KO are in a good position, and they're going to continue to still be in a good position, so that's fine. So no rule changes for Lumineth Realm Lords, but I think that they might be back. They didn't really go away. Okay, so Stone Mage came down 30 points. Leor came down 20. Light of Arthurian came down 20. Can go in a regiment, whatever. But the Ilrith Spirit of the Mountain came down 10, and Stone Guard came down 10 points, which I think is pretty crazy, especially now that maybe we can give them +2 move, which was one of their downfalls. They were a little bit slower, so now they're going twice as fast. Well, not twice, 50% faster. That, I feel like that's pretty good. They were already featuring in lists, and I think 10 points per 5 Stone Guard. They're so cheap now, Stone Guard. It's crazy. Anyway, Wind Chargers also came down 10 points as well. And in the last Battle Scroll update, they did get an update where they changed their kind of ability to shoot and scoot. But they've now got a little bit cheaper. And that's fine. Wind Chargers are really good. Blade Lords down points as well. Think that's fine. And Sentinels have gone up 10 points. I mean, LRL are still a great army. I reckon that they've just given them maybe a few more options and a few more tools, and they're going to continue to perform really well. Our next look is our next unit faction. We're talking about Seraphon. Seraphon have had points changes, but also, ladies and gentlemen, Lord Croak is back. Just if you didn't play Age of Sigmar 3, Lord Croak is pretty famous as being just a giant piece of shit. And he's back to his good old ways. So he's got 2 rules changes specifically to Lord Croak. +2 to cast. So he already had +2 to his casting rolls, but now he gets +2 to casting, +1 to unbinding, and +1 to banishment. And don't forget, he can unbind and banish board wide. So unlike other wizards, he can do it from anywhere on the board, which is good. However, they have also changed his Celestial Deliverance spell, which we'll look at in a moment, where in the declare step of Celestial Deliverance, instead of it being 12 inches, it's 18 inches. And you also change the effect to being D3 mortal damage. So let's go look at that. So it's cast on a 7, but he does get +2 to cast. So really it's cast on a 5. This unit can cast his spell more than once per phase. He is a wizard level 3, ladies and gentlemen. So he can cast this 3 times. Pick up to 3 different visible enemy units within 12 inches of this unit, but it's actually going to be within 18 inches and not wholly within 18. Okay, then you try to cast your spell and it's cast on a 5. Then what you do is you do D3 mortal damage to each of those units. It used to be roll a D3 and on a 2+. Now it's just straight back to a D3, which means, if you're keeping track, that's 9 D3 mortal damage at the enemy units within 18 inches. The mortal bomb, croak bomb, it's called a croaknado is its name, is back. Also, obviously, bonus points for casting this in your opponent's turn as well for another cheeky set of 3d3 mortal damage. Is that enough? He's very expensive. Like, look, he's a wizard level 3. He's 430 points. He can cast a spell through a skink once per game. Like, he's very expensive. Are you going to bring him? It gives you a nice ranged option for Seraphon. Apart from that, Seraphon got some points reductions, and I think the points reductions really show you that they don't know what to do with Seraphon. They clearly wanted you to move away from Croak. They made him okay. They made it so the Slan felt mandatory, because obviously the Slan can bring models back from the dead. But they clearly weren't quite sure what to do with this, because then everything else has just got crazy cheap. Scarvet down 40, Skink Oracle on Troglodon down 40, the Stegodon Chief down 40, Basiladon with Ark of Sotek, which actually featured in loads of competitive lists, down 30 points. Insane. Basiladon with Solar Engine down 30. Engine of the Gods down 30 points. Croxigor down 10. The units that did feature really heavily in Seraphon lists were things like the Croxigor, also Agrodon Lancers. But actually, if you were really smart, you were running Raptidon Chargers, which were very, very effective. Saurus Warriors have come down 10 points. Skinks come down 10. Spawner Chotex come down 30 because it's just crazy cheap now. Pterodon's down and Terra Wings down. So this is a kind of, it feels like a shotgun effect with Seraphon. Seraphon are doing okay. They're kind of in the middle of the pack. They're not bad. Raptidon Chargers, sorry, yeah, they were really good. They were in the middle of the pack. They were fine. They're not great. They're not awful, but like you had to work really hard with them. This feels like, cool, well, we'll bring the Croaknado back, see if that helps. We'll also dump the points on loads of stuff, see if that helps as well. So this would be quite interesting. If you're a Seraphon player, I'd love to know what you think about what would really help your army out. But also, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, and as does everyone else in the chat, because I've been a Lord Croak stan since Warhammer Fantasy Battles. I was doing the Croaknado when it was in, like, it wasn't even Age of Sigmar, it was a different game system completely. So we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, the Croaknado's back. So, Stormcast Eternals. Stormcast Eternals don't have the highest win rate, but they have the most successful win rate. They got the most 5-0s since the last balance update. And obviously, you know, we've seen them win loads of major events. And obviously, the lists have been almost identical across the board. Very few iterations. So it's probably the book, along with Slaves to Darkness, with one of the worst internal balances that they've had. And that's mainly because, I'm going to scroll straight to the bottom, there is a lot of green on this board, but there is also, very importantly, some red. Vanguard Raptors with long strike crossbows have gone up 20 points for 3, which means 40 points for 6. I'm not sure if that's going to necessarily change the game significantly. The biggest change probably is going to come from the fact that when you take Karazai and the Praetors, they can no longer charge in, and using the Honor Guard ability, make it so that your -1 attacks in. That's probably the biggest fundamental change that we're going to see. But definitely the units that featured most heavily, so Vanguard Paladors with Javelins. The Shock Indexes just got brought up in the mix here because they really didn't feature, but the Javelins, they featured pretty heavily in the past 3 months or so. And they went up 20 points as well. So these two units were pretty egregious. And I'm glad to see long strikes be more expensive. I would prefer to see long strikes be even more expensive. I wouldn't have mind plus 40 points on this. I know someone's going to tell me I'm crazy, but I would have liked to have seen it. So with that done, and them knowing that maybe they've neutered the competitive list. But again, like I've said, I think it was really Karazai and the Praetors that kind of brought a lot of that that energy, and they haven't changed points. They have changed, though, how they work a little bit, again, with the seasonal rules. So I feel like then what they've done is they've just stuck a load of points down on other units to try to bring that internal balance back a little bit and give you some other options. Like the Quest of Soulsworn, which is a pretty amazing unit that can either give Strike Last or Strike First out to your army, down 10 points. It's not really much. Stormdrake Guard, down 10 points. Not really much. But like 10 points down on everything. So they're actively trying to encourage you to do something else with the army. Then they didn't change any of the big dragons, which is good if you're a big dragon enjoyer, because you can still run your big dragon and praetors that work basically the same. A big thing that's pretty cool is with the Lord Terminos, they brought out this hero. They made that Lord Terminos can now be a hero in a regiment as well, which is fun. All of the units that came out recently with the Battle Tome took pretty egregious, pretty massive points drops. 40 points down on the Morgriff, 40 points down on Iridan the Witness, 30 points down on Taunus, 10 points down on Ynastra for no reason as well. She's not bad at all, I think, for 330. So this is good for these units, but those units are still pretty garbage on their war scrolls. So even these 40 points reductions, I'd expect in the future to see even more massive points reductions on those, because they kind of need it. So Stormcast is such a massive book. Gryph-hounds just being aggressively up 10 points just feels mean. That's a horrible Christmas present for everybody. Stormcast is such a massive book, but you really saw people just isolate towards the same 5 units, really. It was Long Strikes, Vanguard, Paladors with Starstrike Javelins, Vigilers, Karazai, Praetors were just something that you saw all the time. Are they going to change? We'll have to see. They don't really... Prosecutors didn't change. That's good. Prosecutors still good. That's fun to see in here as well. We'll have to see with Stormcast. I think they probably still work really well, even with the points adjustments, to be honest. They probably don't change enough. So let me know in the comments below with Stormcast. That's the one that I think is the most difficult to really pass, just because the book is so big. I should also mention that there was a rules change as well for Iridan the Witness. Sorry, not Iridan the Witness. Ionis Cryptborn, who also became the Ruination Chamber. Sylvaneth is our last faction. Sylvaneth. So they got some pretty aggressive points changes as well. Treelord, Ancient, both down 40 points each. Lady of Vines down 30. I love that. Drycha Hammerdeath down 50, Archrev down 20, Spy Revenants went down 30 points. 30-point reduction on an infantry unit you could take multiples of is nuts. Big problem with Spy Revs, kind of the problem you've had with other infantry units, is they start as a unit of 5, so reinforceable up to a unit of 10, which does give them 31 attacks with crit mortals, which is kind of interesting. It's only going to cost you 160 points. So you can literally throw waves and waves of Spike Revs at your opponent, and when you do bring a Lariel, you can bring 5 back a time. That legitimately might be like a play. I think someone at least will be testing it out there in the future. The thing is with Sylvaneth, maybe more than any other army, their key way that they work is always built around a Lariel, bringing models back from the dead with that 4-up that she has, as well as herself. Also being a 3-cast wizard, popping down trees and those sorts of things are kind of fundamentals of how the army works. And Sylvaneth are not doing badly. They did in the last Battle Scroll update have a little bit of an adjustment to how their Wildwoods worked. And we've seen them generally doing pretty well. So I don't hate Sylvaneth at all at the moment. I played them myself at an event. I went 4-1. And if I could do it, you can do it. And they're okay. They're okay to great, actually. And I would put them, if you were to ask me right now, I always put them in an A tier. They're just really hard to play. And they're tough. So yeah, I really like this army. I think they're good. And I think the points reductions are good for Sylvaneth. So I think they're in a good spot. Okay, so conclusion time. Let's talk about Games Workshop's FAQs in the past and Battle Scroll updates. As balance patches go and balance passes go, at least in my opinion, some people don't agree, they've been pretty tragic. Normally, it's like plus or minus 10 points with very few other changes. Sometimes we've seen these kind of staples that they put on top of stuff. At one point, there was extra kill points if you killed things, which was really silly. And then in the past, in Age of Sigmar 3, they just started giving out pity battle tactics where armies that were doing bad, they would just say, you can definitely score some points. And people weren't really playing. So this is, I feel, at least a pretty aggressive attempt at doing a balance patch, maybe the best that they've ever tried to do. So from that, massive congratulations to Games Workshop. I think that's cool. I think they haven't necessarily hit the beats on lots of the different armies. Maybe that's because some of those army books are coming out soon, which is a bit of a cope that people always do. Or maybe it's just because, you know, they can't attack everything. Attacking all of it is actually a massive undertaking. And they're a really under-resourced department. But it's a big change. And I think, number one, like I said, I think my analogy is still true. This does feel like it's a bar fight. Age of Sigmar is a bar fight, and someone's just thrown a brick through the window. Doesn't necessarily change the shape of the bar fight, but makes it more interesting. Lots of the different changes could start to build out different army styles in the future. I don't necessarily think, and especially in Slaves to Darkness case, I don't think any of like the big predators at the top necessarily were massively hit. Obviously, Longstrike's got a big hit, but we'll have to see on that front as well. I would say, at least from an attempt, it feels like an attempt to do some balance patches, even on the internal balance, which is pretty shocking to me. So on that front, interesting. When it comes to the elastic mechanic, that's the only like sour taste I have in my mouth, apart from changes to fight twice and stuff that didn't happen. I was a little bit disappointed on a personal note with the kind of elastic mechanic that they've involved themselves with on the double turn. And it really, to me, shouts out that in the future that they are going to change the shape. They're probably going to get rid of the battle scroll. Sorry, not the battle scroll. They're going to get rid of the priority roll in the future, which I think would be interesting. I don't know. Let me know what you think. It really helps me. It really helps me if you leave comments, like the video, subscribe, share it with people, and also if you support me. It's been a long video, it's taken me nearly 4 hours to record, and let me know and the best way to do that is to join me on Patreon. That would be cool. You also get to jump into our Discord server, so that'd be fun. But this is fun. I think this gives people a lot of list writing opportunities to do over Christmas, which I think is cool. I'm off to go find out where my Lord Croak is and put him back on the table. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for watching. Thanks to the Twitch chat who've joined me for this entire video. It's been fun, and I'll see you guys soon.